Hi there, let us continue. This is the sum up part of the course material before we continue in the whole Changemaker Toolkit course 2. Here in this sum up, I want to kind of lay a foundation for the next steps of the work. Hopefully you have by now done the whole Changemaker skill set course 1 to 4 and are getting ready to engage and be part of the whole Changemaker alternate reality project that for 2023 will be within what I call food, health, and environment. And there we're going to put these ideas that you have learned in the Changemaker courses so far, as well as the progressive dynamics of the reality field, working with your own energy system, and hopefully be able to tie these two together into a practical, and I want to call it a hybrid project inside our reality, because it's both having a kind of a business structure in it, but it also have what we could call a project structure to it. It also has the ability to bridge between the inner world and the outer world, so you can create synchronicity, as in what you are dealing with on the inside, you will be mirroring on the outside, which is the basic idea of creating these hybrid projects, so that they are literally what we call within the fourth cycle are similar to the cross structure or the fourth cycle, 4 levels of reality, inner, outer, up, and higher or low, or above and below, so to speak. And that's the cross of the fourth cycle that has been used against us. And we will here use the dynamics of opportunities and oppositions to transform the cross into a willing power source from where we can engage on the pentagram or the fifth cycle dynamics, and there begin to play out the different roles of our fifth cycle components going with the transformative energy system. So that's the plan of this one. And many of you will say, how am I going to do that? Yes, that's the learning process, right? We have so much to learn and to engage in. We have as we talked about in the previous podcast, there's been a little bit all over the place. This series of podcasts since I've made this material over 2 months. And just within these 2 months, reality has changed tremendously, ending up with future sciences that are now being implemented on a grand scale and rolled out, which will change our reality. Whatever people are saying out there, they have no clue of what the real implications are of it. And that's why I made the rollout podcasts. So here I want to sum up a little bit before we move on into the Toolkit course 2, where I'll more focus on the nuts and bolts of how do we manifest. And many of you will have all sorts of fancy ideas of how we manifest, but no, it's not magic, and no, it's not going to be easy peasy imagining things and then they will come into play. No, we're going to work more, as we talked about as well, the patterns of change. And how do we create patterns of change? And again, it depends on your viability rate of your genetics. It depends on your ability to use the transformative energy system. And as always, when we're using the transformative energy system to transform energy units from where we repair the inner realities of our reality field map, as you learned in the template science courses, that your energy system is technically a map of reality. So when you work with the inner map of who and what you are, all depending on your genetics, you are envisioning a better future because you become that map of that better future. You become that complex energy system that is able to manifest it around you by pulling in energy units that matches your map. And these are some of the things of the patterns of change that we are going to master as change makers, that understanding that if we get the transformative energy system really up and running and get our original genetics ignited inside this physical form, having done the reconfiguration, which is the hope work, well, then we can combine whole and hope within ourselves, not as masculine and feminine, but as this understanding of how to work with spatial energy, as this is the interior map that we have, and then manifest it as progressive energy inside this reality, where we really begin to work with the nuts and bolts of our reality field to change it under the ancient ones, of course, having given us that second chance, saying, okay, if you can manifest this type of fifth cycle reality within the scheme and the schematics of the ancient ones and the original purpose of this universal structure, we will leave it in this sector for another 50,000 years. But if nobody gets there, not even kind of, there is not enough with orbs. And the reason why I'm saying that is because the last 2 days I've kind of stretched my entire field into the middle domain, and as I did in Australia, where I released a lot of the middle domain creatures and old races and let them go into the restoration program. I've done the same with America the last couple of days. So therefore you can say, well, the middle domain under my understanding of what that is and what is in alignment with my perceptual sphere and what the interior map I have going back to the Pillar Project and who came here and that work that needed to be done. My entire inner universe is a manifestation of my genetics and what they hold of information. And by that, I can align myself with different code streams. And by that, drum to life things that have been forgotten, things that nobody has seen for a long time. And by me expanding my sphere into these and looking at these levels, these beings that kind of, it's like being in the woods and you don't know that there were animals there, but then you suddenly hear a little bit of in a bush or something and you look and there you have a kangaroo is standing there, or a, what do you call it? A wallaby. That was a wallaby actually standing there looking at you and just standing still, or a pelican, or here in Denmark when a snake just crossed my path and looked at me and really we had that eye to eye contact where he was looking at me with his head up, which is very rare. One of the big 1 meter long black snakes we have in Denmark. And just looking at me and I was looking at it and then was just moving on because there was no interference there. But this magical side of our reality that most have forgotten. And for me, the ability to work on that level, aside from all of the other different, whether they're real or holographic entities or they are imprints of alien races that have been here or past races that have been trotting along on our planetary surface or whatever's been going on, all of these imprints are there, and they are technically access or doorways into other levels of reality. And these are some of the things that we will learn as change makers, not that we're going to work with divas and fairies and what have you, because they need to go to the restoration program, or they need to go home wherever they came from, because they are interplanetary beings. Many of them came from other, what we call planets in our system. They used to be reality fields. They came here as the last attempt to undo the effects of the timeline event. So either way, there are many levels of our reality that is collapsing, so to speak, as the base program is now beginning to deteriorate, and everything that has been going on here for the last 15,000 years will vanish and cease to exist, and we will then see what was surfaced. And that's part of the reconfiguration that we're getting ready for, living in the outer domain, trying to get into the fifth cycle of the ancient ones and still remain inside the fourth cycle of whatever's left of ancient technology and races that still remains as the colonizing races. And whatever that means, we don't know. But I do know one thing for sure, and that is when I look into the future, including what I have heard from some of the future humans that kind of have crossed my path, in my inner work, whether they entered into my universal structure or we got aligned with each other and by that became visible. This is the oddities of the inner world, is that they are technically only visible if you have genetic affinity with it. Otherwise it doesn't exist, which is one of the mind-boggling things, how things cannot exist. And at the same time, when you look at it, it then comes into life, which reminds of René Descartes, that in the 1700s, something, you can look it up, said that, is the rose really in the next door room when I'm not looking at it? And that was a really good question. And he just got this whole spin off where he just went into a mental spin where he then concluded that he didn't really know, but because he was thinking and because he was perceiving, well, then he was existing as well, because it all came down to, do I even exist? So thereby the Latin work, that where he says that because I perceive cogito ergo sum, as in because I think or because I perceive, then I exist. So that's the cogito ergo sum, or however you want to pronounce it. That's Latin. You can look that one up so you can hear yourself or hear another pronunciation. Nobody really knows how Latin is pronounced, right? So everybody has their own version of it. But the point being is that he was probably more accurate than he knew and thought of. And we're not going to go all Descartes here, because he's one of the reasons why we have that division or divide between matter and consciousness. He was the seed of that one, even though he actually played with the idea that the seat of the soul was in the pineal gland. So you kind of get that one from there. But that's not where we're going to go here. But when we talk about realities and when we talk about how do we manifest as change makers in the material so far with the progression sciences, both the free material and my YouTube videos and what I put out there the last 10 years, including the progression sciences, and where I hope we would go with the ability to connect to the restoration program. I am connected to it, but the rest of you, and then still standing there in the doorway into the restoration program, say, yeah, I'm not dead yet, am I? I'm not ready to go there, because once you go there, whatever's left inside this reality will cease to exist. Well, then kind of, yeah, I got 40 years left or so, more or less. So what am I going to use that for? And that's why I'm just kind of, I'm standing in the doorway. It's still there. There's a version of me that holds the door to the restoration program as long as I live. But with all things seen in hindsight and everything that I've been going through, well, even though the future humans are just a concord, they are not my allied per se. Point being was that in the future, these human races, they report that it's a very cold, devastated solar system. It's a cold sun. It's barely functional. Very little light comes from it. It's completely white. And it's enormously cold in the solar system. Everything has been pulled out. And we understand now why that is, because we're in the process of everything being pulled out. And they have come back to try and change that. They have traveled back and are part of several projects, of which NOAA was one. We have also the Enhanced Human Project, the Solar System Nations, and these different groups that have tried to alter that future. And they have not succeeded so far, because in their traveling back in the future, because we are on that path still, they, which we're seeing now, which is interesting because we had the whole Pentagon report on the UFOs, and I just read a couple of days ago or something, and we're here today saying it's the 18th of December 2022. They wrote that they have found no evidence of alien interference or alien presence on our planet. And of course, because they are not looking, they're looking the wrong places. They're not connecting correctly. And I think I will work a little bit more with that, because what leads to these devastating futures? Well, first and foremost, because people kind of go into that denial that there are alien factions. There was this hype. There was this possibility that they were there, but then it's been all shut down because the Pentagon did not conclude there was anything. If they had concluded there was something, well, probably not let us know, right? But if they had out openly, that would have changed the future. Because then people would have begun to understand there's actually something out there, and then they would begin looking. But now they've shut that one down, so now we are back to the problem of the future and that is one of the major trajectories of that one, is first and foremost the enormous focus on technology. That's a problem. And then the fact that people are not looking for the alien races, which is why when I talk about the C Forum, I'm thinking, how am I going to put that one together? I'm still playing a little bit with that idea, because there are clearly forces that don't want us to look into the fact that there are aliens. We have seen the ups and the downs, and it's still fringe. And how do we make that non-fringe and make it part of everyday life? As we've seen, for instance, with mindfulness, that used to be a Buddhist idea that when I grew up was fringe, and now it's become a normal tool within psychology. So how do we make it everyday life? And that's part of the whole academy. And that's why I got the assignment back in 2016. And the wording was specifically Both in 2004, I got create the Interplanetary Academy, which then failed. And that was good and fine because it was based in the stellar activation cycle and in wrongful ways. But it laid a foundation so that I, in 2016, got the assignment, create an academy where people are taught about these things so it becomes part of their everyday life. Make the higher awareness hype, make it an everyday life thing. So that's been part of what I've been doing and trying to do. And we are in this process of, okay, then we have got the transformative energy system. We have worked with it in different ways and then bridge into where most kind of the ones that have been working with these things, the progressive sciences, whether it's the Keylontics or the Bailey material or what have you. The Bailey material actually tries to put it into some kind of societal structure, which Rudolf Steiner did as well. But there is the Keylontics, for instance, the latest branch of the tree of complex information systems that would teach us to operate in the higher vicinity of our constellation, which means I'm here talking about the stellar energy system predominantly under the humanoids. We're not taking people into how do you then create a life inside this reality with that higher consciousness potentials. And that's also part of being a change maker, to understand that, for me at least, this work I've been doing has always, aside from making it, the assignments I've got, as in kind of make this knowledgeable because it's important in the future. If people don't understand what this is, then we end up in that very cold, devastated future where humans have no higher level of anything. And then this system just collapsed because whoever were here of transhuman agenda or parallel universal matrix or the dark ones or whatever, at that point in time in around 2050 or around 2050, they pull out because in 2066, that's the last moment where all of what's left of the ancient ones and the progressive and what have you pull out because people are not looking anymore. They're not manifesting it anymore. They're not drawing it in and make it part of their perception and their understanding of reality. And by that, it vanishes and ceases to exist. Use it or lose it. And then they go into that trajectory of climate chaos, which is climate chaos at the time, no longer a crisis, but complete chaos. And that future is not where I want to be. Let me just put it that way. Not where I'm going to have my vacation. That's for sure. And sometimes when in contact with some of the future humans that are living in space stations and on a planet that is absolutely not a place I would like to live, then I get so cold because everything is cold. It's not even ice age. It's a coldness that goes through all levels of your being, and you can keep the house warm and what have you, but you have that constant feeling that you're living in a universe that's dying. And that's something that is so profound. It's the deep space of nothingness that is present there. And that's a completely different type of energy than we're having now. We still have a sort of viability rate, not just because the sun is shining, but there's still some active energies left in our solar system. And this is the plot of trying to revive that too. So we're not only reviving our own transformative energy system by being change makers, but we're also trying to manifest it into reality so that we can change that future. For me, it would be grand if we could do the original progression dynamics and you say, well, not everybody wants to be under the D14 collective. No, I completely understand that. But that was the plan to begin with, people. That was where we came from. That's what this universal cycle and these cycles that we are in are part of. That's what they are made for. That's what it is. That's the rules of these 12 universal or 10 universal cycles. No, 10 was the last one. 12 universal cycles, not about that one. But the D13 collective, they only want the 10 universal cycles of the third cycle, the third universal structure, so to speak. So we have both the third cycle, the third universal structures, and the third three grand cycles and all this kind of thing you remember from the Souls of Humanity. So let's not get into all of these weird details of realities within realities and spheres within spheres, because where does it actually belong? As in just saying kind of in the outer domain, yeah, we have 9 dimensions, But in the outer domain, we also have the different pillar projects of where we have between 2 and 8 pillars. In the 2-8 pillar, where we also have 7 dimensions, and there we have a dimension 6, but we also have a dimension 6 of our reality field. And we also have a dimension 6 in the middle domain. So that's why the whole kind of beginning to look into, oh yeah, the 6 dimensions is the same on all levels. No, it's not. Depends on where's your center point, right? So that's the importance as well. So the only true star map you have and the true reality map is the one that is part of your transformative energy system. There you become the core of that energy system, of what you build into it. And then the sphere around you will create the access points from where you can gaze into other realities by stretching out your perception field, and by your complex and engineering of your energy system, you activate these different levels of reality. Otherwise, they just look like deep, dark space of nothingness. Of course, at some point, when there's no longer viable code streams, well, there will be nothing to activate. And then it will just be matter forms that are left in whatever form and version they have in the future. Sorry about that. So that's the understanding. Sorry about that, of the progression sciences and the progression work, is that recalibrated the existing 12-layer energy system to match the original transformative energy system of the restoration program. But the transformative energy system is also, we remember, has two purposes. One, if everything goes south, we will move into the restoration program. If you create the transformative energy system and learn to utilize it correctly, you will build the needed code sequence that will allow you to, once you're done with this physical form, engineer an orb of energy, of highly transformed energy that matches the restoration program configuration. And because you have worked extensively with energy and completed your cycles, you will literally be drawn to the restoration program, because you have built that in via the transformative energy system and the utilization of it, exemplifying it inside this reality, so that the restoration program will say, well, you are viable for a continuation and you are preservable, because you have proven to follow the original laws and dynamics of these universal cycles. So therefore you can continue. But you need to heal a little bit, friends. So therefore you get into the restoration program. But if we as change makers can completely shift into the 5th cycle, using the progressive sciences and the progressive energies to transform our reality field, well, then we suddenly go into the hope work for a better future, where we get the new possibilities and options we must deal with as part of the Density 1 reconfiguration dynamics and challenges as solar humans. Then suddenly we created a new civilization. So that's the hope work, where you kind of have the whole work, the whole progression sciences, the nuts and bolts of the past, so to speak, of how to create that energy system that is what we need to have to transform energy, were what we call the pivotal work of the Pillar Project. And if that's a success to the degree we can inside this reality, and we then combine that into some kind of project, well, then it is, and solve some of the future issues of our reality. Well, then we are combining the best of all worlds, because then we have both the transformative inner reality working with energy in the correct way, so we can perceive other realities, get access to the hidden layers of the unseen worlds that is no longer accessible for us, but we can recreate that by upgrading our energy system, and by that activating higher levels of our consciousness potentials from our template. And then use that to transform more and more energy on the inner reality. So our inner map, our world map, as we talked about in the transformative sciences, which I began every time showing you the reality field. Yes, we have the core domain, the inner domain, the middle domain, the outer domain. That's just a construction. But what is in these domains depends on our consciousness potentials. It depends on what we see there and what we seed there, see there and seed there, perceive there and put into the ground. That will be what will come to life. We are the manifestors of the outer reality. It's only because the the hijackers and under the base program rulership of the Dracos and the colonizers, they have kept us in what we call a steady state of false oblivion. So this, as that falls and crumbles and the original pillars are activated of our outer domain construction, which I'm working on, whether it's there or not, I know it's there. So I'm working on it with the intention where you could say, well, is it prudent to have that intention? Yes, because I know what I'm doing. Because the construction itself tells me what to do. Similar when I worked as a healer, did I go into the healing session with my client having the intention of what I wanted to do for the client? No, not at all. I put myself in the position of being the resonance board of what the energy system of my client needed. So when I came in and amplified, ignited the client's energy system, be it male or female, then that energy system would tell me, this is what I need to heal. This is what I need to activate. This is what I need to get back on track. And then I would assist the energy system of my client to achieve that. And then I discovered, I might be able to work with the energy system, but there was no point if the client wasn't able to work with the energy system. Then it was done for naught. Then it would just flare up. And since the client would not be able to work with it, then it was just go back dormant again. So it was a waste of my time, and it did not shift the client into a better position because the client was not working as he or she were supposed to. And I got some who got really activated, and many of them came and said, please close it down again. I can't handle it. No, because then you get in to see what's actually in your energy system and why you are in oblivion and why you have gone dormant, because you lost the ability to see beyond your three lower fields because they are so clogged and bogged down of all sorts of distortion. And that's too much for many people. Trust me, I know that. Been through that since the 2000s. The enormous amount of work it takes to clear our energy system to reach the true potentials of what we are. So that's also to take into consideration as change makers when we begin to say, I want to change the world out there. Yes, you can't change much out there unless you have completely transfigured yourself. Reconfiguration to the dot of who and what you are on the inside. Because otherwise, what you will change, you will literally just shovel energy around out there, matter energy around. As in, I want to change the world. The way the capacity right now you have right now is the same as taking a piece of furniture from one room to another. You have not changed anything. You have just changed the position of the furniture. It might look better, but you have not changed anything when it comes down to it. So that's also an understanding of the three pillars of the hope work, where again work with, we are in what we call a third cycle system. So it must be between two oppositions that create synergy, or the opposite, if we don't master it, lead it to devastation and what we call completion, and then nullify it and make it void. So the Changemaker Project is where we understand the inner wells of the progression sciences and the 12 layers energy system we have created using the transformative abilities to manifest. And when I say manifest, as in can we then manifest it in the outer reality? Not in the ways that we would like to, but we can, within the next 12 years, once the base program and its solidification processes that keeps us artificially dormant are gone. Yes, we will have the palm races, and yes, we will have a lot of other stuff going on, and it might, whatever's going on with the different transhuman agenda or what have you, they get in control of our reality, as I talked about, with the fusion techniques, with the toroid technologies, with the toroidal technologies or torus technologies, with the donut shape type of technology where they can create fusion, but that also alters the foundation of our quantum fields, linking it up to AI. And we are having the quantum bridges in place now, which called Fermi bridges in the future. So yes, the future humans can time travel, but they're time traveling around in an empty space. So it doesn't really lead to much. Wherever they go, they just go into past versions that have been devastated and left destroyed. And once they got here and they discovered that this actually existed, because so far in the future they've forgotten where they came from, that's been a huge what we call kind of in the beginning a journey of hope for them, thinking, oh yeah, now see, we are there where we actually took the root of the changes, and then having to live through that, and they went further and further back in time and tried to alter the DNA, but they were altering it in blindfolded, because they didn't understand what they were dealing with. And that's some of the issues, again, when I talk with whether they're shells or ghosts of some of the previous missions, or they're an echo from the future, or it's part of their AI, or some of their crafts that are still floating around, and whatever I come in contact with. It's just that kind of lack of understanding what we actually have here and what we are left with. And that understanding that this magnificent inner world that we actually have access to is vanishing. It's being pulled away from us. And what we're left with would be this shell of the timeline event, the solidified crystalline matter that is molecular in structure, that has that crystalline build up, which they are of course now changing with AI and the Fermi bridges or the quantum bridges, as well as the toroidal sciences that are going to create fusion and create new elements that will change what we understand as our planet, and will align it with the machine worlds. So that's been taken care of, and they have all of those holographic programs, which we have all been tested. Those of us who have what we call psychic abilities, we've been tested the last 5 or 6 years since 2016. They've run all sorts of different programs, which is what I've talked about in the holographic realities. These are the alien technologies they are playing in with the event program to control humanity. So humanity will literally not see that the world around them is crumbling. They will be fed with an artificial perception inside of their head, so that now, instead of having technologies that are upholding it, now it's humanity that's upholding it, but now in a controlled manner. Before, under the colonizers, well, then that was the reality that was in check. So thereby there was not much interaction potentials. But now it's all fluent, and we have the fourth cycle and the fourth dimension and what have you in our reality field, because it's already here. It's been here for years. But then since 2016, it's come back, but it's controlled by the event program, upgraded into the machine world version of it, using the new reality programs to do so. Even though that was the enhanced humans and their project failed, well, others take over. That's why they're called scavengers. And they're adapting it to what they want and what they need. And we're seeing that. There are traits of it all over the place. I'm not going to amplify that further, but just look at it. We are now under control of species that are enormously warlike and territorial. So we are moving in the wrong direction. So when we talk about the future, we have different issues at stake here, which is why I find it to be important that those of you who are doing this material, you understand the importance of why we do this work. Not for, as in kind of, because it scares the crap out of us, or because it's too dangerous to envision that things could go wrong, because they're already gone wrong. They already had that future. It's already happened. That's why they come back and try and change it. So what we could say is kind of, yeah, let's change what is to whatever possibility we have, so that we could perhaps manifest the fifth cycle under the Ancient Ones. And as I said in the previous video, if we don't succeed, well, then that will go dormant, and then they will recalibrate the technology. There will recalibrate the fifth cycle, or what remains of this original construction, and pull it out, and everything else will just vanish and evaporate, and then it will recreate itself in the original holographic metaverse. So it doesn't matter that it's been damaged on what we call the lower levels of it, because it will just recreate itself, because that's what these technologies can do, and then go dormant and wait for a next collective that will come through it and activate it and ignite it and put it into play. So that's how that one goes. Again, remember, we have different specialities when we talk about the consciousness potentials, and when we work as collectives, that's kind of the full package that goes in and ignites these constructions. By being part of them, igniting them, and perceiving them, they come to life. So consciousness is always the perceiver. In a way, it's the observer, but an observer is kind of one that stands outside and observe. A perceiver is something that interacts with reality energies, and energies can solidify itself permanently or non-permanently, mostly non-permanently, because it depends on the consciousness potentials that ignites it. But consciousness is igniting, and energy is always there in some form. That's the cycles and the constructions within the cycles, of which there are a vast range of different types of constructions that are all energetic. But they are non-functional and non-existing until we perceive them. Then they come to life by our perception, by our energy system, by who and what we are, but what we have built. And that's why when I say in the sixth cycle, we float around like huge orbs, like spheres. That's collectives are technically spheres of consciousness units, but they are also individual spheres within spheres, and spaces within spaces, and consciousness within consciousness, like a Chinese doll. Constantly going in all sorts of directions, always changing, always being something else, never being the same, never being stagnant, never having a sense of self. If the construction demands a sense of self, we create a sense of self. But if the construction is a construction that doesn't go with a sense of self, but with a collective of being one of the many, well, then that's the consciousness potentials we have, and we create forms that are usable in these types of constructions. So there's not one way of existing. There are many different ways of existing. But it all comes down to consciousness and energy and life force. And that's the main goal of what we're doing here. With everything we transform, the goal is to create life force, which is the next component of the next universal cycles. Always keep that in mind. The continued perpetuating evolutionary progressive dynamics that we are part of. So the Changemaker project, just to sum that up in the understanding, that's why I call it a Changemaker, of course, playing on the pun of being social entrepreneur. Because what does innovators and changemakers and entrepreneurs do? They engineer things. They transform things. They create new versions of ideas so that we have some kind of movement of change inside our reality. And that's where we go as change makers. And we could do that in many places, because what we are going to do, we're not just going to have good ideas where we shovel around matter, right? The crystalline matter from one room to another. But we are literally going and saying, okay, we have this inner version of ourselves where we have a blueprint of a different reality. And how do we actually use that map and these abilities to transform energy from within to create kind of new sciences? Because it all begins with some kind of architecture of what we're dealing with. And it all comes down to understanding the laws of the cycles that we're part of. And it all comes down to the understanding of the rules of engagement. And that's where I want to go in the next and last, the final podcast, where I'll just do a quick sum up of the what we call the 2-8 pillar work, where I'm not going to look at all of the shitty levels of it, because I actually today ignited the original version of it so that we can say, okay, we know we are going into the new grand cycle activation and cleanup of the 2-8 pillar from 2025. So how do we actually use the original version of it? As we talked about in the template sciences, where we're working with it as part of the progression work, as part of igniting our transformative energy system. But how do we use the principles and the rules of engagement and the original pillar project construction architecture to create the fifth cycle realms, from where we can say, well, we have, of course, the 3-9 pillar, which has been part of the progression sciences as well. That's the whole creation of the inner map. That's the 3-9 cycle, or the 3-9 pillar work in the third cycle, where we literally in the first 1-7 pillar created the architecture of our energy system and the template and what have you, put in what we wanted to express. In the 2-8, we worked with others in teams to figure out how do we then make this work so we could implement it into reality in the 3-9 pillar as these maps where we could either do progression couples or work as team members that were sovereign. And in the 5th cycle, we must stand sovereign. That's what the pentagram is about. The cross is about these kind of, you have different things that ties oppositions, that ties together male, female, which are kind of what we talk about, the female user principles that are going with principle 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12 as order, balance, and harmony, progression dynamics. That's solar, quote unquote, female. And then you have the principle 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and 11 as chaos, diversity, and transformation, elevation dynamics that became the D13 collective humanoids. But here I deliberately put it in as solar because they were originally part of some of the solar, what we could call other version of the solar races, because I'm a little bit careful with calling them male and female. But the principle 1 to 11 are technically male, and principle 2 to 12 are technically female. But it's just so kind of, these are just constructions, because we haven't got words for it of the true human races and how they operated and how the highest levels of them you remember from Souls of Humanity, there was the laggards, and then there was the ones that were ready to elevate and move on. They had gone beyond what we could call these different combinations. They had been in all of the pillars there where they had expressed all of the principles and variations and combinations. And sometimes they teamed up with others, and then they became each other's counterbalance. So instead of man and a woman, they became each other's counterbalance and expressing different types of versions of the principles so that they could focus on specializing within different branches of reality where their specific work area became the one that they chose, but they needed to have the other one. So therefore they teamed up with another one that would then carry the other version of it so that they could supplement each other and push each other and develop each other by still having that huge efficiency within specific areas, so that one would say, I'm doing what we call the feminine pillars, and you are doing what we call the masculine with space, and I'm doing the interior architecture. So thereby we combine these two things together and create a project that will then really blast the 3rd cycle energies out of their version of it. And here we can say, well, in the holographic metaverse, did we have the 3rd cycle energies? No, but that became apparent as there were still ones that were not ready to move into the next level of the pillar projects or the holographic metaverse and their pillar projects, because the pillar projects were there too. So this is to understand that the laggards, the ones that were still clinging to the 3rd cycle, yeah, they might have spilled over. Yeah, they might have entered into new cycles, but they were still operational within the 3rd cycle energies, but they're as fires. So that's when I talk about the density 1 reconfiguration, where our transformative energy system shift into fires, because that is what the 3rd cycle energies can do when they're at the highest trinity structure. They become wheels of fire. And then they flip into the cross, where the cross then begins to express these different types of fires into different orientations, which then begins to create movement, which then begins to create steam, as it's said. And by that, life can unfold in variations that can take physical form. So that's part of that understanding where things are going, using the different dynamics. So I'm here when we talk about solar races of the future. I prefer that the whole stellar, yes, we could say they are stellar solar, if you like. We could do that. In the future, there are no humanoids. There are just humans as we know of them. And my plan is and plan was always that the D13 collective, or the humanoids, the ones that are part of the pillar project, should get out of the 3rd cycle. They did that in the 1-7 pillar, get on board with the 2-8 pillar, which were the solar cycles, and then begin to work together with the solars or the true humans. And that's where we had the original progression couples, where the solars became the mentors 4 of the teachers for the humanoids. And then, of course, we know that kind of did not go so well, especially after the timeline event, where some of the humanoids got highly hit by the timeline event and got infected. And by that, they pulled down their solar partner completely and dragged them into the previous cycle. And that was the first really dysfunctional malfunction of the original progression couples, which is why that just kind of have that version of it is not viable. It's not functional. So we must investigate it and invent new versions as who we have become as a gender now, which is what we call the enormously distorted, downsized version of the original professionality and specialization dynamics, and then try to get back and say, yeah, we might have these 2 different types of bodies, which can now be changed right away, right? And the hybrids, they can shift gender as they like, more or less in the future, be more prominently so, and don't have to do the operation. They can come in as these hetero, and I'm here literally saying hetero gender in themselves. They are both males and females within themselves, and they're not hermaphrodites, as it said in Greek, but as this complete, they can choose their gender once they're born, and that's part of the CRISPR technology that will assist in that as well, making that much, much more easy. So the 5th cycle solar partnerships are to counterbalance and outweigh the stellar polarity forces of the old failed versions of the Atlantean 5th cycle attempt by the use of the above principles. So we kind of understand that when we go in, if we do choose to have partners, whether it will be as progressive partners where we work with the inner energy system to develop our principles and potentials as different forms of consciousness that works with different ideas, whether we choose to work with the progression dynamics or the elevation dynamics under the chaos, diversity, and transformation, or via under order and balance and harmony. And we need both as a progressive couple, whether we are 2 females that choose to do that, or 2 males that choose to do that, or male and female that choose to do that, or eventually as groups. But we still need to stand sovereign in who and what we are and have our own transformative energy system and be able to work with the inner realities on our own, because that's the 1-7 pillar that we master there. It's only the 2-8 pillar we go in and say, well, let's work together to change reality, which is part of the 3-9 pillar. And there we change reality by who and what we are. So this is not magic. This is not where the master and his mistresses, and I'm here literally, that's where we have taken the original female mistress, which means master in female, has taken it and become the second woman that is in used for sexual magic and sexual bullshit and using witches and what have you. One master with 12 witches or whatever to manifest whatever he wants. That's the really perverted version of it. So we go in this complete understanding as equals, and the respect and the honor that we have with our counter if we choose to have a counter. If we choose not to have a counter, then we'll do it as individuals, as sovereign, and then we will work with our inner sphere as that's what we want to do. So technically, we do want to change the reality. We do need the Trinity. We do need the different principles expressed within different consciousess structures within a setup of a counter. Whatever that is, right? So we don't get too soulmate-ish, twin flame-ish, whatever ideas. But that's where we have different forms of flames to create the unification of the different forms of principles into the hexagram or the 6-dimensional sphere that comes by combining these things, but not because we are melting together with a counter, not at all, but because we have assisted each other to such a degree that we ignite everything within our own flame bodies, our own transformative energy system. So all of the 6 layers flames up because we have worked together to work with reality, where reality will then add the last component of our transformative energy system, because you can only work so far on your own with the transformative energy system. We always just remain in the inner realities. But to be able to really become a manifested being that can call itself the ability to master energy and consciousness and life force, not as a master, but mastering it, being a skilled, knowledgeable, wise existing living being can only come into play if you work with reality and transform the reality constructions. There you prove your true abilities to master energy and consciousness, because yes, mastering your own energy and consciousness is the first step, but the true test, the true path where you really show who and what you are, the true path to the complete developmental processes and abilities you have, will be when you are able to transform the reality you're part of, because that's what we're here for. It's not just about us as individuals. It's also about elevating the universal structures. And that's the end goal for all of us. So in the next and last podcast, I'll talk a little bit about the rules of engagement seen in that light and how we are to use that in our changemaker projects.